Allie, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I'm excited about today.
I am too.
Let me read just a snippet of his bio. This is Steve Harden. Steve Harden believes that everyone has, with the right coaching, skill, and motivation, the ability to do worthwhile work as part of a team and makes a dent in the universe, if you will. A coach, trainer, speaker, author, and entrepreneur, Steve is the founder of Leaders Get Results and the chairman and CEO of Life Wings Partners. Steve has trained and coached over 20,000 people in 225 organizations around the world. And there's more. I'm going to let Steve talk more about himself, but I know his focus and how I met him is through his training in healthcare. And just through our previous conversation before he walked in, or as he was walking in, was really it's in, and I'll let Steve explain this more, but just the communication and teamwork in high stress situations. I think started out in flight with pilots, but then migrated over to healthcare emergency rooms, which is clearly a great way to do it. So,
wow.
Do you consider yourself an entrepreneurial couple? You and Matt.
Yes.
Why do you do that? Why do you think that way?
Well, I don't know if I did until you and I were talking about this, but he started his own business with a 97% fail rate, and that was super stressful.
But like he went into a business with a high fail rate, but he's succeeding well now.
But he succeeded. Yeah. And then I think I have more of that mindset, but I don't want to take the risk.
Do you guys have?
I like to just hunker up next to you.
Do you guys have business meetings?
Yeah,
Life meetings, family meetings. So my theory, when I was talking to Steve about this topic, is I think every couple to some degree is an entrepreneurial couple because you're managing a household, you're managing resources, you're communicating or not, depending on what the case may be. And then, in my instance, selfishly, we kind of doubled down a little bit. Not only do we have the family household and the kids that we're managing, but also business, and so not only is this a great host, but I am taking notes today for the record. Let's do a quick break and then we'll come right back and meet Steve.
From our studios in Nashville, Tennessee, this is Healing Centers, a podcast where we talk to experts and leaders in wellness, mental health, physiology, fitness, nutrition, and any other topic that helps us get through the day with purpose and through our life with long-term success and health. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and please give us 5 stars wherever you listen to your podcasts. Visit our website at www.healingcenters.co to share feedback, suggest future episode topics, and find out more about the people on our podcast.
All right, we were rolling. Steve, thanks for coming today.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here.
Man, we are too. This is. Do you consider this topic to be a little 1 degree off your wheelhouse? Because I know you do communication trainings in corporations and healthcare and pilots and things of that nature. But I just feel like the Venn diagrams are probably going to overlap. And based on our conversation, you've already identified several really clear, obvious things that we can talk about today. But what do you think?
Well, I wouldn't say it was directly in my professional wheelhouse. It's really more life's experience, right? Mm-hmm. So my bride and I have been in business together, actually multiple businesses. So I do agree with your comment that all married couples are entrepreneurial, right? Just managing the home, managing your family, that requires almost everything you're going to have to use in business as well. So when you asked me about this originally, my mindset was beyond that, where you're actually formally in some sort of business arrangement where you have gone into business together. Mm-hmm. And so, it professionally isn't my will. I'm not trained in any of the things we're going to talk about today. I've just lived the experience and, thought about what I've learned from that experience.
Well, and Allie, he may be downplaying himself a little bit because he does extremely high-level leadership training and communication training in stressful environments or people who work in stressful environments. And so actually, I think this is in your professional wheelhouse.
Absolutely.
If
there's a lot of overlap. Right? Yeah. A lot of what I have learned in the work that I do will certainly apply to couples and to the marriage relationship. Mm-hmm. You have to be careful when you use it, though.
Yeah.
Agreed. Right. And so is your wife also actively involved in your leadership training businesses and things?
Oh, yes. She has been. How we sort of got into business together, she's in the health club business, or was in the health club business. She started out as a step aerobics instructor years and years ago, kind of climbed the ladder, ran a YMCA for a while, and then got recruited to open a health club from a national chain there in Memphis. And they had an interesting business model. They allowed their club managers to invest in the club. So not only did she start it and run it as the general manager, I invested in it. And because of the nature of my financial investment in the club, I had a lot of access to what was happening in the club that my wife was running. So we very quickly realized, hey, we're kind of in business together. And then at the time, I was running an international consulting company, helping hospitals do big improvement projects, quality and safety improvement projects. And I very quickly realized that I loved the creative consulting aspect of it, didn't really love the business aspect of it. And she's a whiz with the financial aspects of running a business, and also a whiz in leading people. So very shortly, I asked her to manage the money in the international consulting business, and to also manage the people that were running the back office, all of the office operations. And so not only were we in business together in her profession, we were in business together in my profession, and that's just continued on. She started a coaching business, which I became part of, and then she helps manage the money for the Leaders Gets Results business as well.
Do people marry people with complementing skill sets like that? Is that a thing?
I don't think it happens that often. I think it does, and I think it was just serendipitous for us.
That was not part of the equation. I don't think either one of us thought about those things when we were thinking about, okay, is this the person I want to spend my life with?
I think it's the beautiful thing in marriages when you kind of evolve into that, right? Like, I think a lot of times we don't know that's what we're initiating in relationship and romantic relationship, but then as you evolve in your own growth and identity and process, you also have this crazy magical evolution together. And I think a lot of times you end up in that complement.
Well, you can. I think you can also mismanage it badly. I was thinking about the whole topic while driving over to Nashville today, and it's really either the best of all worlds or the worst of all worlds, right? So, I mean, that's why you have office romances, because you get people that are passionate about their occupation or their profession, and they get to share that, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just romantic. I mean, it's not just the
right. So if you're married to someone whom you love deeply, you want to live the rest of your life with, and you can share your professional life with them as well, you've just expanded the horizons and the opportunities to share things that you're passionate about.
Right.
If you handle it well. But if you don't handle it well, you've just given yourself many more opportunities for friction and conflict. And if you mismanage that, you could ruin your marriage.
Sure. I've noticed, and maybe selfishly ours and others, I think, and I'm extrapolating, but well-intended couples might fall in or just end up in their track where they can help the most, whatever their gift is or whatever hole they see. And what I'm interested to hear from you, Steve, is that I don't think we ever talked about it. I don't ever think we decided roles or let's do this or that. It's just this wasn't getting done, or I'm pretty much better at this anyway, and we both know it, or you're better at that. And it just goes, it just evolves. And I'm not quite sure, as opposed to a business where you have org charts and structures and things like that, you don't really do that, or maybe we should. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think if you begin to have conflict, you do need to start to organize it and do some of the things that you would do in a professional business setting. My wife is a very strong personality. I call her my female Marine because she runs to the sound of the guns. I mean, if there's a conflict or a problem that needs to be solved, she's got a high sense of urgency, and nothing can happen until that problem is solved. So she's going to go there, and I'm a former fighter pilot, so I see a problem, I attack a problem too, right? So we're both kind of that way, and you can begin to step on each other's feet. So if you don't organize the division of labor, if you don't sit down and say, okay, what are you really good at? What am I really good at? What are you going to take care of? What am I going to take care of? You're just opening yourself up to a whole lot of conflict, which is eventually going to affect your marriage.
Yeah, we actually spent quite a bit of time as we go through growth. We work with attorneys because there's certainly limitations in how a healthcare company can grow and if physicians own a business and that sort of thing. So you really have to divide up entities and responsibilities and make sure that no corporation ever has clinical decision-making power, that it's all the doctor and things like that. But that legal process, while it was expensive and a pain, was almost a little bit like therapy. I mean, because we really were forced to detail out, but line by line, who does what. And it's really helped a lot. Now the only problem is just to one of us to stop talking about work at home, and that's the other issue too. But I don't know how you get over that.
Well, I think all entrepreneurial couples, struggle with that issue of when are we on the playing field and when are we off the playing field, right? Because you can only take so much of it. During the pandemic, lots of folks worked at home. Lots of work by Zoom. And although I think there are many people that don't really want to go back to the office, I think there's also a large number of people that want to go back to the office because as that kind of work from home process developed, the boundaries began to go away, right? So your boss calls you at dinner time and says, hey, I know it's dinner time, but you've been, working at home all day long. I got a problem. It really needs to be solved, right? So if you accept that once, then it's easier for your boss to call you at dinner time the next time. And then the next thing you know, they're calling you at 9:15 and say, hey, I hate to get you out of bed, but, we got this, meeting early in the morning and we have a problem and, can you help me with it? And that's why I don't think work from home will be the wave of the future. I think eventually they'll go back to the office just because work gets done at the office and you have more boundaries. That's the same problem when you're an entrepreneurial couple, right? Because it's really easy for your spouse to roll over at 9:30 at night in the bed and say, hey, that bill we need to pay or that person we need to interview. And we can't live like that. We all need time to recharge and refresh, and we need self-regard and self-care. And if you haven't carved out time for that, eventually being an entrepreneurial couple, you're not taking care of yourself, right? Your whole life is consumed by the business that you're in together, and that's just not a winning strategy. Right. Ask me how I know that. I've made that mistake. Yeah.
I was thinking, I don't know enough about your course the way that Chuck does, so this might be an irrelevant question, but
it's all good.
Chuck always laughs at me at how inquisitive I am. I can't stop. So I was just sitting here thinking about your leadership course, and if you are the partner in the relationship that maybe isn't as driven in this entrepreneurial mindset, do you see a consistency in your course of kind of personalities in a married relationship of, I would imagine the ones taking your course are, more focused in that and how that plays out in their relationship if the other person isn't on board at the same time or isn't as driven in that season of their life to make this business successful or whatever. I can imagine that can create a good amount of conflict.
Well, just based on what you said before on the ability to take risk, right? So really that's what, at least the way we teach it in the leadership labs, leadership is all about risk, right? So our definition of leadership is having the skills and abilities to take the organization in a place that it wouldn't ordinarily go due to inertia or entropy, right? So basically, as a leader, you're saying, where we are right now in our current state, we can't stay here, right? This is not the fulfillment of our mission and vision. And so we've got to leave this current state and take a journey and go to some future state, some desired future state. We can't stay at point A. We've got to go to point B if we're really going to fulfill the mission and the vision we have for the organization. Well, any journey like that encompasses risk. Can you really unroot the organization from where it is now and take that risk of taking that journey? Well, I think that's true for entrepreneurial couples, right? So you have one person in the relationship that says, if we're really going to be successful, we can't keep doing what we're doing. We've got to step out of our comfort zone and take this journey and go here to this desired future state. And as you well know, everyone, it's scary, and everyone has a different level of risk tolerance, right? So yes, that can be a real source of friction. Now, how do you overcome that? I think that's what the leadership lab is all about is let's remove some of that risk by knowing exactly what the steps in the journey are, right? Wow. So let's follow a proven process that literally thousands of organizations have used to successfully get to this new desired future state and minimize the risk, right? So what's the first thing we're going to do? What's the second thing we're going to do? What's the 32nd thing we're going to do? And we're going to know exactly what sequence we're going to do it. It doesn't totally eliminate the risk, but it mitigates a lot of it, and it gives you a sense of confidence that we're following a proven process here that's going to get us where we want to go. We just have to follow it, right? And yes, there'll be places along the way we're going to take bite-sized pieces of risk, right? And we're going to break this journey down into manageable steps. I think that's how you overcome it.
Gosh, that's so huge. I was just thinking in my own vulnerabilities in my marriage, Matt is definitely the one that's much more of a risk taker. And I think one of our biggest places of friction over the last 10 years has been that if he felt like the risk was good, he just kind of went.
Right.
And I was left going, I need those 37 steps before I'm ready for us to take it. And he's like, I already have it figured out. Just come. We just got to go. And so I think to offer something like that where there can be clear communication around, hey, this is our second step. Yeah. And this second step is going to last 3 months. And then we're going to reevaluate. We're going to communicate again. And I'm going to take you to the third step. I think for the one that doesn't tolerate risk as well, to know that there's a plan, it makes it much easier, I think, to trust the risk taker.
Sure. Well, in a professionally run organization, you're also going to attach a budget to that journey, right? You're going to say, well, we can't stay here at point A. We've got to go over here to point B. And it's going to take X number of months and X number of labor hours, X number of investment. So here's the budget for that. Well, there's no reason you can't do that as a couple, right? So if you're putting your own nest egg at risk, why not sit down and say, okay, here's the steps from point A to point B. Here's what we can afford to invest in this, right? This is about what we're putting at risk. And if everything falls apart, and it's not successful at all, and we lose everything we've invested in it, we're going to know what that amount is before we start, and you will have already had the discussion, can we afford to lose that?
Yep.
Right? And I'm willing to bet there are very, very few couples that are willing to sit down and have that discussion.
We didn't. Yeah, and I think that would have been invaluable.
It's a hard discussion to have.
It's scary. Yeah, again, it brings out some scary vulnerabilities.
Yeah, my spouse is very, very gifted clinician. I've learned a lot from her, and whatever she turns away or pushes people away, they tend to come back because her focus is so much on quality and quality care. She knows her audience so well, infinitely better than I ever will. She manages from the hip a little bit. She just says, let's do this. Yeah, I got it. It's cool. I got it.
Well, there are some folks that are really gifted at that, right? They're just born with a knack for business.
They just know their audience so well.
Right.
And have such a confidence in where they come and, who's paying and who's not paying. But there is that 20% that I wish we could have talked about that one a little bit more.
You're trying to catch up.
I'd like to understand a little bit about that, and things, but I'm sure that's just part of the journey, right?
Mm-hmm. It is.
Well, I think this is a great argument for why you need to be really clear what each other's roles are, right? So it's been very clear with my bride and I that she's the whiz with money, right? So if I need a certain investment to grow the business or to add something to it, although I could just, go into the bank account and write the check. I don't do that, right? Number one, because we've had real clear discussions about how we manage the money. And number two, it's going to affect my marriage because when she sees that I've taken the money, without talking to her, right? It's going to spill over into every aspect of our lives. So I'm a huge believer in sitting down and having a discussion about almost to the point of a job description, like these are the roles you're responsible for. One thing I learned at LifeWings is to take that to the next step and say, okay, if you're responsible for that, what sort of outcomes would we see if you're doing that well, right? What sort of financial outcomes, what sort of, people outcomes in terms of retention, try to put some sort of metric on the outcome that would tell each of you that whatever you're responsible for is actually being done well, right? So at the end of the year, we're going to see, X amount of profit, or we're going to be able to reduce our taxes this much or whatever. And that way you've got some sort of objective way to sit down at the end of the year and have a conversation with each other about how this partnership is going, right? Because you've tried to put metrics on outcomes related to the things that you've agreed that you're going to do and things that, she's going to do.
How, in your leadership training, how do you encourage teams with markedly different personalities or strengths to open up that conversation? To say, clearly you may have been reasonably successful just because you're all well-intended and talented people, but how does that manifest from going from sort of a loose group, basically aimed in the right direction, but certainly not meeting the good goals as you could?
Well, I don't know if this is the answer to your question. It begins with understanding who comes to the leadership lab, right? So typically I'm dealing with mid or late mid-career physicians who are wanting to be better equipped to assume more leadership positions in their organization, right? They may be great clinicians.
Right.
Sometimes I do leadership labs for nurses. They may have been great clinicians as nurses, but they want to do more, right? They want to take care of people, but they also want to have some say in how that care is being provided. They want to affect how the organization is providing care. So they, no one forces them to come to the lab. They come to the lab because they realize they're really good clinicians, but they don't know everything they need to know about leading a team. So I'm not forcing anyone to drink. They're drinking on their own. So I don't really have a problem trying to convince them that they don't know everything they think they know about leadership. Otherwise, they wouldn't even be there. And we open the whole lab one of the very first webinar we do, I point out that across the entire United States, 70% of all improvement projects in the United States fail.
70% of improvement.
70% of all improvement projects in the United States fail. And it doesn't matter what profession or what business you're in. So only 3 out of every 10 improvement projects are successful. And the purpose of the lab is to equip the folks in the lab with the skills to be in that 30% that are successful, right? So, so once they realize that, just because they want to improve something or they want to be a better leader doesn't guarantee them any success at all.
That's right.
They have to know the steps. They have to know the methodology. They have to know the skills. They have to have the knowledge. And only when they have the knowledge and skills and apply that are they going to be in the 30%. Otherwise, they're most likely going to be in the 70th.
So I know after my spouse did it, there was some sort of, I don't want to say the word test, but some sort of assessments or personality trait type analysis, and which I did, and so did her partner. And we found that to be very interesting and helpful. And
her business partner.
Yeah. No. Her actual business, her clinical business partner.
Yeah.
Not right.
Just for clarity.
Right.
Okay,
That's
going.
right. I got it. Thank you for keeping me on track on that one. But but that's really interesting. And is that too weird or cheesy for a couple to do?
Oh, absolutely not. And the reason the tool that you're talking about is called the Judgment Index.
Okay.
The underlying philosophy behind the assessment is that once you have the basic skills and abilities to do a job in a profession, so in this case, basic skills and abilities to be a physician, what ultimately determines your success once you have the foundation is the exercise of your judgment, right? Because you're, especially in the life of a physician, every day is exercising judgment.
Absolutely.
Right? Patients present themselves,
Yep.
and you're using judgment to figure out, okay, what's the diagnosis, and based on that diagnosis, what's the plan of care. So every single thing you do all day long is an exercise in judgment. So the basic philosophy of the Judgment Index is that success in your profession, once you're equipped with the basic skills, is based on competent exercise of your judgment. And there are 3 main areas of judgment that we all use no matter what profession we're in. How we deal with people, our interpersonal skills, how we get our work done, what I call getting your to-do list done. The Judgment Index calls that tactical insight, right? What are we doing each day? And then the third is strategic thinking. Are we choosing to do the things, whether working with people or getting our to-do list done, that are bringing us the biggest bang for the buck? They're moving the ball forward the most. And the Judgment Index has been around for 40 years. It was nominated for the Nobel Prize. It's extremely accurate. Everyone that takes it says it's sort of like having a spotlight on your soul, because it really figures out where your strengths and weaknesses are in the exercise of your judgment, both at work and at home. So I think it's absolutely crucial for entrepreneurial couples to take some sort of assessment like this so that they know their relative strengths and weaknesses. It may surprise you as an ex-fighter pilot, but I'm somewhat conflict averse on an interpersonal level, right? And I have learned through bitter, hard experience how to overcome that, right? I've taught myself the script to how to be assertive, with employees and coworkers. I've practiced it, but it's not my natural bent. I am quite a bit different from my bride in that, she runs to the sound of a conflict. So she's really, really good at that. It's not necessarily my strength. We both took the Judgment Index. I took it first. I was so impressed with it. I asked her to take it. And that was one of the first things we did, is sit down and compared the results of our Judgment Index to figure out where I had strengths that could fill in her weaknesses and where she had strengths that could fill in my weaknesses. And another way of looking at this is a SWOT analysis, SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So it basically, in a very scientific and proven way, does the SWOT analysis for you. It shows you where your strengths are, and exercising your judgment shows you where your weaknesses are, and allows you to compare and contrast and figure out how can we best work together as a couple where we fill in each other's gaps.
Mm-hmm. Have you and Matt ever done a SWOT analysis?
I was just writing that down. It's so good. We have done a few of these tests over the years, but I really am interested in that. We haven't done that, I don't think.
Well, I've done almost every assessment there is, Myers-Briggs and all of those things. And I always came away from them thinking, okay, now, but what do I do with this, right?
Sure.
The beauty of the judgment index is it gives you actionable information, right? So one of the things that came out of my judgment index is I have a lot of negative self-talk, right? I'm very critical of myself. And this is fairly common for physicians and clinicians as well. I have discovered, because I've done a lot of judgment indexes for folks in that profession, there's a lot of critical internal dialogue in these sort of type A folks that are drawn to those professions, and that eventually affects the quality of work you do. If your personal life is a mess, eventually your work life's going to be a mess. So that gave me some actionable information, and then, all right, so I have negative internal dialogue. What do I do with that, right? So that led me down this whole trail of positive affirmations and, the mental aspect of improving your performance. So all of that to say, of all the assessments I've taken throughout my life, I find the judgment index to be the most valuable. And the minute I took it, I said, I've got to get trained in this. So I went to their headquarters.
You said how you got it?
In Chattanooga, and got trained to provide it and then debrief the results.
I remember when we took it, and after we all did the assessment, it wasn't just here's your report. It was a dialogue after that. Okay, so here's who you're working with. Here's you. How do you fit in that? I remember we had that conversation. I assume you do that with all your clients to some degree, I would assume.
Well, the judgment index is built into the leadership lab that I do for the Tennessee Medical Association. I'd say probably 25 to 30% of the folks that are in the lab are involved in something with their spouse, whether it's a more formal business arrangement or some sort of hobby or something. But I get a lot of requests like, can I get my spouse to take this? And then would you debrief?
Yeah, which is exactly what happened to us, right?
Right. Yeah. And I find it very valuable. I think they find it valuable as well, because it gives them a real sense of how we fill in each other's gaps. And I think that's what marriage is all about, right? As a couple, we are better than we are solo. And this just shows you how to be better, right? Where your gaps are, where your spouse's gaps are, and how you can fill in for each other.
That was beautiful. Let me take a quick pause. We'll do a quick break, and then come back and maybe look at next steps on what couples can do who are, I think even the most successful couples can put together a to-do list, right? Be right back.
We invite you to become part of our growing Healing Centers community. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and subscribe to our podcasts on Apple Podcasts or wherever you like to listen to your podcasts. Visit us at healingcenters.co for the most current social links and information. Share comments and feedback on our website. Let us know what topics interest you and what guests you want us to invite on the show. If you are in the healing business as a therapist, doctor, or other wellness expert, please let us know who you are and your specialty. We'd love to be able to connect our listeners to great professionals like you. www.healingcenters.co. Follow us, join us, and grow with us.
Okay. I've got lots of notes and more questions that we're going to have time to answer. But, Ellie, I was thinking it might be fun to pepper him with a few more details on what he's doing at his leadership lab, and maybe find a way for some next steps that any spouse might be able to do, you know,
that's a perfect intro. I was going to ask him a question just that I was personally intrigued by when you took the break, and it really lines up with that. I mean, I'm sitting here, I'm not a medical provider, and I'm like, dang, I wish I could take that course.
Well,
or I wish I could do that judgment.
You don't have to be a
index.
medical provider.
So that's
to
what I was
do
going to
it.
ask.
Right.
So
Yeah,
how do
it's
you do
universal.
these for, do you do them specific, like you specifically do them for people in all different types of businesses, or are you focused on clinicians?
Well, I'm mostly focused on healthcare because that's that's where my niche is. But everything we do is universal to any organization. So if you wanted to do it, I wouldn't want to do it just one-on-one. But if you could line up 2 or 3 other people that wanted to do it, we could figure out how to make it happen.
Is the group dynamic part of the growth and education?
Yes, you have to get feedback from other folks, right? So I'm a huge believer in experiential learning, right? I'm just not going to lecture you.
Right.
My whole that's why I call it a laboratory, right? You can't come to the lab unless you're also going to do a project. So the project gives you an opportunity to use what you're learning. And when we meet together in a live workshop, everything's just in time. I'm going to show you what you need to do next, and then I'm going to ask you to do it, right? And you're going to do those things with the other folks in the lab. So, for instance, one of the things we learn is how to recruit champions, right? So
That's so key.
You can't be successful in whatever your improvement project is unless you have some champions that are going to be on your team with you. And so you have to go recruit those. Well, you have to figure out who they are first, right? And we have a whole set of criteria for how to figure out who your potential champions are. But once you've figured them out, then you've got to go have a conversation with them. And I tell folks in the lab, this is one of the most important conversations you're ever going to have in this improvement project you want to do, because without a champion, you have very little chance of success. So wouldn't it behoove you to practice that conversation? And if you're going to practice the conversation, you probably ought to have a script. You probably ought to say this first, this second, this third. And those things you say should probably be proven and practical, right? So know that they'll work. So we go through this whole exercise of who are your potential champions? How do you identify them? Once you know who they are, you have to know 2 things about them, and you're going to take those 2 things you know about them, and you're going to incorporate that into your script. So we write the script, have them write the script following a format, and then once they've written it, they pair up with each other, and they actually practice saying the script to each other, and then they get feedback from their training partner. So it wouldn't make any sense to go through the leadership lab by yourself, because you wouldn't have anybody to practice that with, right? And so almost everything we do in the lab is broken down into a module where I'm going to give you knowledge, I'm going to give you a skill, you're going to put that all together, and then you're going to practice it with people in the lab, and then you're going to go back to your organization and you're going to do it for real. And I tell the folks in the lab, if you can't do it in here with someone who's like-minded and wants you to be successful, then you're not going to be able to do it when you go out of this room back to your organization. So we've got to practice it experientially here.
Gosh, I'm thinking about, even if you're not, that's such an important skill for a couple to have in their own personal life as well. I mean, you think about in every different life phase, there are different people that you need to champion your family and what you're growing. I mean, whether it is a childcare provider, whether it is community support for one another, whether it's giving back to the community. I mean, there are all these people. We're so intertwined. And to think about that thoughtfully, about who are we, locking arms with here as part of our vision, versus it just kind of haphazardly coming in and out.
Well, honestly, sometimes you just need your spouse to be a champion for what it is you want to do. And since that's a really important conversation, you probably ought to know how to structure the conversation with your spouse.
Yeah, here.
Absolutely. Yep. Gosh, that's huge.
Even just, simple things like, if you're an entrepreneurial couple and one of you always wants to bring up some, critical business issue at 9:30 at night just before you go to bed, you probably ought to have a script that you've both agreed to, right? So somebody raises the issue, you've already made an agreement that, once you're getting ready for bed and to retire for the night, that business is off limits, right? So, but somebody, they just can't wait. They got to talk about it, and they violate your agreement. How you say what you say at that moment is really important for your relationship. It probably should be based on a script. The script should be proven so that it works. And it should be something that you've both agreed that, when we're holding each other accountable to the way we're going to operate as a couple in this business, we're going to use this script. And when I use the script, you're going to know that I'm doing it because I love you, because we've agreed to act this way and we've agreed to talk to each other this way. But if you don't know the script and you hadn't made the agreement to use it, then it's not going to work.
Yeah, I think that's so often how we create these negative patterns in our relationships.
Yes.
Is something like that happens, we don't learn from it or take time to kind of step away from it and say, hey, I noticed this and this, or I noticed this has kind of created this level of conflict. Can we reassess that? But instead, our brain kind of just gets used to that one loop. And I think in marriages, we create so many of those negative loops. And it sounds like you're teaching such critical skills to use as a tool when we're in that loop to make something different.
Well, I hear that a lot. I've actually heard a lot of physicians say to me, "Hey, I could use this with my teenager." Well, absolutely, you can,
absolutely,
and you certainly should.
I've seen some situations in our world where, and your profession too, as a therapist, that giving profession as a doctor or a nurse or a therapist, I think that's going to be I don't think I know. It's going to be very draining if you put in a full day of just that support and listening and, passionate involvement in someone else's issues, that by the time you get home, there's a chance you might say a sentence and it's going to come out a little bit not, in other words, you're relaxed finally. You can go home and maybe not keep those guards up. And so I think that really you need to be cognizant. I know I do of that. When someone's coming off of a work day like that, not just an executive work, but just someone in a very giving profession like that. I would think pastors might have that similar situation too.
I can only imagine, yeah.
Well, I think we all do, even if we're not clinicians, right? We're giving of ourselves. So one of the things we talk about in the leadership lab is 5 deposits for every 1 withdrawal, right? So like in Allie's case, she's just been, giving deposits into other people's lives, which means they're withdrawing from her cosmic energy bank account. So now she goes home, right? And somebody else wants to make another withdrawal from her cosmic energy bank account. And I think that's one of the problems with entrepreneurial couples is, because we know each other so well and we're so, the concept of familiarity breeds contempt, right? We're very familiar with each other, right? And so we don't think that our spouse needs 5 deposits, into her cosmic energy before we make a withdrawal on them. So especially if you're married to an entrepreneur and you're in business together, you do need to say thank you and I appreciate that and that was really well done and you're really knocking it out of the park.
I got a good one. How about I was wrong. Sorry about that.
Gosh.
Yes.
That's good.
Well, that actually is a deposit, right? When you admit that you're wrong, right? That's a deposit. And I think for most entrepreneurial couples, if they're struggling, if they would just look at their interactions in terms of deposits versus withdrawals, they're going to see they're making way more withdrawals than they are deposits into their spouse.
All right, I'm looking at some notes that me and Steve were talking about. Let me just throw a few your way and see what prompts you. Wordplay laziness. What does that mean to you?
Right. That's kind of related to what we were just talking about because we're so familiar with our spouse and we know their strengths and their weaknesses. We tend to treat each other in ways that we would never treat a professional colleague. We might say something that's catty. We might not think through what we're going to say to them. We might not have a governor, right? So we would open our mouth and just start saying things. Hey, I'm married to you. You can't go anywhere, right? You know me, I know you. I'm just going to throw this out there. Well, you'd probably never do something like that to a professional colleague at work. And
I'm sure not. Yeah.
Right. So you can't be lazy. You can't have lazy wordplay. You have to think about, well, if I were experiencing this particular emotion or event with a professional colleague, would I say to them what I'm about to say to my spouse? And sometimes it's hard to stop and think. And in fact, Gina and I, my bride, we tease all the time because she's extremely quick-witted. She's the kind of person that you never want to have an argument with because she has the perfect, snappy answer to everything.
Right.
I'm the kind of person that lays awake at night, and at midnight I'll wake up and I'll go, oh, I should have said this. Yeah. But she can do it in a microsecond. And so we have this little signal we do where she holds her forefinger and her thumb real close together, meaning I know I have no space between what pops into my head and what pops out of my mouth, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's something that she's working on because she's so quick-witted that, she knows she needs to slow down and think that through and say, okay, yeah, he's my husband and he loves me, but do I really need to say this to him?
Wow, we got one like that. It's filter.
Yes.
It's just filter.
Right.
Little
That's
comment.
good.
All right, here's another one. Pence rule.
So the Pence rule. So Vice President Pence, when he was vice president, had a little bit of notoriety because he and his wife have a rule that even though he was in politics and had lots of meetings, that he didn't do dinner meetings, lunch meetings with members of the opposite sex one-on-one, right? So there had to be a third party there. And so this has come up in our marriage because, both Gina and I are coaches. She has a coaching business called mynextsteps.life. And, basically what I do with Leaders Get Results is coaching. And I do a lot of judgment index assessments, which sometimes results in individual coaching sessions. And so early on, we had to come to an agreement. What were the rules? Was I going to have a business meeting, especially when I was doing big projects in the hospitals? I might be working with a chief medical officer who might be a female, and she wants to go to lunch.
Sure.
and in the cafeteria and talk about how the project is going.
Yeah.
And sometimes, quite frankly, it was uncomfortable to say to them, could I invite my colleague, or do you have a colleague? And sometimes they would ask me, well, why? And I said, well, my wife and I have an agreement that, I don't have business lunches or business dinners with members of the opposite sex without another person present. Most people really appreciated it. In one case, the female took umbrage at it, thought it was, somewhat parochial or, mansplaining or something like that. And she abruptly canceled the meeting. But for the most part, it was well received and respected. But in the end, I honestly didn't care what they thought, because the most important person in my life is my bride. And it was important to her, therefore it became important to me. And, sometimes on different coaching engagements, I will explain to her who the person is and what the connection is and, how we're going to conduct it. And so, we've had conversations about the Pence rule and how that
and is that really the lesson at the end of the day, do you think, Allie, where it's maybe it's this Pence rule, or not exactly the Pence rule, but really it's a conversation with your spouse on what that looks like. What are you okay with? What do you think is appropriate?
Yeah, it's just boundaries. What's appropriate? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to summarize this. And again, I agree with you. We could have 10 more sessions with you. I have so many other questions I've been writing down, but I just started. It was important to her, so it became important to me. And I'm like, wow, that's such a takeaway for a marriage, that even if you aren't ready to take the risk for their vision, if it's important to them, then being willing to lean in to find your importance in it. That's a terrible way to say it, but that you begin to value it as well, and to find a way to do that. I think that's just an incredible life lesson for sure.
Steve, we're going to roll. Do you have any closing thoughts? And I know you're a library, so that's like, asking a Ferrari to drive 10 miles an hour. So no worries if you don't. But
well, I'd say that being married to an entrepreneurial person, being in business together, when it's done well, I think is one of life's great treasures, because you have so much more to be passionate about together. And you can both see that, like you said in the intro, I'm a huge believer in leaving the world a better place than we found it, right? We want to pay rent for having been on this earth. So, people in the lab hear me say this all the time. Hey, let's go make a dent in the universe. To be able to make a dent in the universe with your spouse, not too many more joyful things you can do.
yeah, it's inspiring.
Really, really is.
Yeah, I like that. All right.
Thank you so
Based on that, I'm going to
much.
close now. Thank you, Steve, for coming. We're going to put links on the descriptions, and so make sure you check Steve and his business out when you check out the podcast. Thanks, guys.
From our studios in Nashville, Tennessee, this is Healing Centers, a podcast where we talk to experts and leaders in wellness, mental health, physiology, fitness, nutrition, and any other topic that helps us get through the day with purpose and through our life with long-term success and health. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and please give us 5 stars wherever you listen to your podcasts. Visit our website at www.healingcenters.co to share feedback, suggest future episode topics, and find out more about the people on our podcast.